I want to tell a story about a woman and a dollar. This woman's name is not important, but let's just call her Michelle. Her story isn't unique. Her story is very common. Michelle is 26 years old. She works as a nurse full-time, and 6 days a week she clocks in at the hospital, works her 12-hour shift, and then she clocks out. Every 2 weeks she gets her paycheck, and by the time she cashes it at the check cashing business, the money has nearly all been spent. This day though, when she cashed her check, something was different. Instead of taking the cash and going to the Arabone gas station by her apartment building to get some small groceries, a small amount of groceries, she decided to go to the black-owned bank a few blocks away from her apartment building. She walked up to the banker and she told him,
"I'd like to open an account."
Well, the banker smiled back at her and he replied,
"Great, let's get started."
So Michelle sat down across the other side of the banker's desk and she asked him,
"I'm wondering what happens when I open an account. What can my dollar do when I deposit it with a black bank?"
Well, the banker had never been asked this before, so he paused for a minute. He looked at her and said,
"Everything."
Now the banker starts getting excited and he leans in and this is what he says.
Do you know how long $1 stays in the black community before leaving? As of 2015, $1 circulates in Asian communities for a month, in Jewish communities for approximately 20 days, and white communities 17 days. But do you have any idea how long it stays in the black community? With black communities, $1 only circulates for 6 hours.
So Michelle looks back at him, somewhat shocked. She says,
6 hours.
6 hours.
Now she had never heard anything like this. The banker continues and he says,
The census in 2014 said blacks make up 13.2% of the U.S. population. But in terms of buying power, black Americans possess $1.2 trillion. If blacks were their own country, that would mean blacks would be the 16th largest economy in the world.
So Michelle is really taken aback at this point. She wants to know more, so she asks him,
Well, what does that mean for my dollar and this bank?
Well, why don't you tell me about yourself, and I can help you better understand. Do you have any kids?
She looks at him with a soft smile on her face, and she tells him,
Yeah, I have a 9-year-old.
The banker looks at her application, and it says that she's 26, so he looks back at her, and he tells her,
Oh, so you had your son pretty early on.
I got pregnant when I was 15, but don't go judging me. I'm a great mother.
So the banker reaches out a little bit, and he says to Michelle,
Look, I'm not judging you. I see plenty of people in your situation, but as black people, we have to do a little work. With white teens, the birth rate in 2013 was 19 births per 1,000, but with black teens, it was 39 per 1,000. So it's more common than you think. It just makes some decisions a little more tricky. Well, tell me this, do you have 2 incomes?
As a matter of fact, I do. Even though I got pregnant at a young age, my boyfriend and I were able to work through it and we got married. Both of us are working. People think that black men don't want to be in their child's life, but that just isn't true. Black men are more involved in the lives of their kids than in other communities these days. He works as a coach and history teacher, and he makes decent money. He's great with our son as well. We beat the odds.
Now, this is pretty important because a large amount of black children are born out of wedlock. So the fact that they were able to get married and stay married is worth celebrating. When compared to whites, the divorce rate for blacks is slightly higher at 42%. So the banker says to Michelle,
One of the best things your dollar will do is help improve the school district.
How's that going to help improve these schools around here anyway?
School districts have more resources when the taxable income in a community is higher. If banks like ours are able to loan out more money, then our town is able to show more money in circulation. And when a community has people in it that earn more or start businesses, then our schools are able to afford books, telescopes, computers, a gym with wooden floors, working heat in schools, and most importantly, a livable wage for teachers.
So, you see, one of the reasons why private schools tend to perform a little better than public schools is because private schools have slightly more resources, but they also have a higher teacher to student ratio. So this means students have more access to educators, and they can help them succeed because the number of educators is greater. Michelle says to the banker,
Well, we want to homeschool because the public schools are failing our children.
the banker's excited about this. He says to her,
I homeschool my kids. In fact, more and more black families are choosing to homeschool. In the last 15 years, the number of black children homeschooled has doubled, from 103,000 to about 220,000.
homeschool is a great alternative to public schools for a few reasons, but one big one is the
school-to-prison pipeline. It's shorthand for how schools are funneling students, especially black students, into the criminal justice system. It started in the 90s when schools responded to fears about crime with zero-tolerance policies, which mandated suspensions and expulsions for certain violations. They also cracked down on little things like talking back or uniform violations. The hope was that it would keep bigger problems from bubbling up. But as a result, out-of-school suspensions have doubled since the 1970s, and they keep increasing even though juvenile crime rates have now been dropping for years. Around the same time, the number of police officers stationed full-time inside schools has increased by a third between 1997 and 2007. Ostensibly, they were there to prevent mass school shootings like the one at Columbine, but they end up being a way for schools to basically outsource discipline to the police. Schools with officers have 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without them. Sometimes the results are shocking. But the less visible effect is that schools are feeding the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Consider the fact that schools are more likely to have an officer on their campus if the student population is more than 50% black. You might assume that that's because there's more crime at these schools, but although students at police schools are more likely to be arrested, they're not actually more likely to be charged in court for weapons, drugs, alcohol, or assault, at least according to one study. During the 2010-2011 school year, 1 in 6 public school students in the US were black, but they accounted for 1 in 3 arrests at school. Same goes for other forms of school discipline. Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. It actually begins in preschool. 18% of preschoolers are black. But of all preschoolers suspended more than once, 48% are black. Studies show that differences in behavior can't fully account for these disparities. Black students and white students are sent to the principal's office at similar rates, but black students are more likely to end up with a serious punishment. One study found that white students are more likely to be suspended for provable offenses like smoking or vandalism. Black students are more likely to be suspended for subjective offenses like talking back or insubordination.
so if Michelle chooses to homeschool her son, then she has a chance to avoid these racially insensitive policies that these schools abide by. So Michelle tells the banker,
I want to make sure my child is getting the attention he needs so he'll actually graduate from high school. I don't want him to be another black child that's underemployed because he wasn't able to get an adequate education. Graduation rates for black women are a lot higher. In fact, higher than ever. And public schools are helping to put young black men into prisons. We plan on overcoming that. I don't want my son to fall victim to bullying and then end up being expelled because he felt he had to defend himself with violence. I don't want anyone putting their hands on my child, but we have to find a better way to handle our problems. Too many children are dying for me to let that happen.
I want you to know black on black violence is more real than white on white violence. White people kill each other too.
Oh, I know they do. Whites are victims of violent crime from other whites at a rate very similar to black Americans. Black on black crime is just the talking point that keeps us victimized.
So kind of excitedly, he agrees with her, and he says to her,
You know, I'm so glad you're even aware of this. There are so many groups fighting to reduce crime in the black communities that go unnoticed. In Philadelphia alone, there are at least 50 organizations involved in anti-crime politics since the early 2000s.
So the banker knows how tough things can be for black men in America. He knows that black men don't have a lot of emotional support, See, the banker started seeing a therapist every week, and now in the past, his black friends and family would have called him weak or said that he needs Jesus and not a therapist because therapists are for crazy people. But now that's slowly starting to change. One way to lessen the racial divide in mental health is for African Americans to get involved in the field of mental health, because right now black Americans make up 2 to 3% of mental health care professionals and practitioners. So the banker is able to have his mental health addressed by a black therapist who runs a practice staffed with black people, with a loan that was financed through a black bank that was invested into by black dollars. One woman with $1 has the power to influence how all of these things play out. More economic power in the black community will influence how politicians operate and what laws get attention. More money in the community changes how schools are able to help children avoid succumbing to gang violence and modern day slavery through the justice system by providing them with an education that will hold up and give them a chance to be gainfully employed. The mobility of the black community starts with black people being concerned with black people. So at this point, Michelle and the banker have learned quite a lot about each other. And the banker files her application, he walks over to his cabinet, and he pulls out a new checkbook and he hands it to her. So a woman with $1 may not seem like much, but Michelle knows better than that. And now, hopefully, so do you.